Clock time is 5:58 or so.
Hello, Scott.
Hello, so far so good.
Yes. It's very kind of you to be willing to go to the town hall and do this.
The least I can do, and I love easy jobs that don't take too much brain power. So I'm fine. Thank you very much for your thank you, but this is good.
I'm just want to make sure I logged on. I'm just gonna make sure, I'm gonna turn my volume up a bit, get
Yep.
my documents in order.
Are you gonna want to do a share screen?
Yes, I think so.
I haven't tried that before, but do you have a little green thing that says share?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Good. Then
It
you-
says host disabled participant screen sharing. So I don't know if you
Oh.
can you make me a host, co-host or something?
I haven't ever tried that before, but yes, make co-host. Do you want to make Willa the co-host of this meeting? Yes. Oh, that's not bad.
And then
I'm gonna wave.
we could do a little test.
Yeah.
Is that showing up?
Popped up. There it is. Yes.
Okay, good.
There
I'll
it is.
stop sharing for now, but
Yeah, that's
Um,
nice. At least we can do it.
yeah, it's good to know.
Yes.
Um,
Oh, hello, Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Oh, and there's Holly in the
Hey,
background.
Holly.
So good to see you both as well. I'm so sorry I missed the training meeting. I have been fighting pneumonia all winter,
Oh,
basically.
no.
Ooh,
And it happened to hit on a day where it was just bad.
Yeah.
that's horrible.
It seems this winter I've heard more people when they've gotten sick, it's been really bad. Like
Yeah.
I
Well, and
think,
just like not being able to completely kick it.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got my first cold since pre-COVID around the Christmas holidays. And, like usually you have a cold, it's like 3, 4 days. I was sick
Yeah.
for 2 weeks and just,
Yeah.
yeah. So. Hey, Gabrielle.
Hello.
Good evening. Will, I saw the back of you in the cafeteria not that long ago.
Rush home.
I gotta find my document. I'm gonna go back to
Hello,
Gmail and
Harris.
find it.
We'll do introductions later, but Harris is interested in joining the DRB. Happens
Oh.
to be a neighbor. I was
Wonderful.
successful in getting an applicant.
Good job.
That's
Very
great.
nice. Oh, that would be super.
But hopefully we won't have any East Calais, West Calais, concern about numbers and
Oh,
representation.
right, yeah.
I'm actually joking, but
Yeah.
I guess
Except that it's
yeah.
not really a joke. There can be people who get upset about that.
Well, we can claim Rachel for either side.
You can. Born and raised on one side, living on the other.
Yes.
Bill.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Phil.
Oh, sounds like it's working.
Hello.
Nice to have you with us.
I think we're only waiting for Toby. I'm trying to remember. I think that's it, right?
Yeah.
Should we wait another minute and then we can just dive in? We have a quorum.
I got a
We have
very I got a very encouraging note from Toby
Oh, good.
today saying that today he submitted the last of the FEMA paperwork for the 2023
Ah,
grant recovery. That's been a long, long
yeah.
thing.
And yeah, and we were a place that, like, thanks to Toby and you and Charlotte and others,
Kari,
just
thank
like
goodness.
really had our act together. So if that's how long it takes when you really have your act together, man.
Oh,
Whew,
yeah. Yeah, we were
it's
lucky
tough
in
on towns.
some, well, Plainfield's having a terrible time, poor guys. But
Let's
Toby,
hope the money shows up, right? That's the question now.
That
it's
is
been
now the
trickling
issue.
in and the state releases it a little bit at a time. Um, there's a big chunk that the state, it's sort of, if they feel like it, they may give it to us. 25% of our total claim is off in limbo somewhere. But we'll see.
Why don't we start? Maybe Toby will join us. I mentioned that Harris is interested in joining the DRB, and I know some folks know Harris, but why don't we start with going around doing introductions and maybe just saying where we live. So I'm Willa Farrell. I've been on the DRB for I think 2 years now, maybe a little longer. I live on Wheeler Road, and I will go to my right, and that's Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Seelig. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up in East Calais in the village, but I now live on Camp Road in Maple Corner. And I've been on the DRB a little less than Willa, so I guess a little less than 2 years if you've been on for 2 years. And I guess I can pass to Scott.
Scott Message. I'm in the town hall. There, the rules say we have to have one person at a physical location to do this Zoom thing. I've been on the DRB. I'm not sure. Well, I started as an alternate, so I've been on several years. I live in East Calais. Hello, Harris. I remember many years ago touring part of your property over on the mountains. It was a
Okay.
visiting the beavers.
Yeah, okay,
It was a good experience.
good. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I'm Harris Rowan. I also live on Wheeler Road and moved here in April. However, I also lived here, as Scott said, in the 90s. So I just moved back into the same house I used to live in 25 years ago.
Wow.
And yeah, just looking for some ways to get involved with the town. I'm also on the Trails Committee. When I lived in Burlington, before I lived here, I was on the Planning Commission in Burlington, and we had some intersection with the DRB. We'd have joint meetings once in a while, but I still have a lot to learn about what the DRB does and how it does it. So that'll be my first goal.
I'll go next. I'm Gabrielle Molina. I live actually one road north of Wheeler Road on Long Meadow Hill Road. And I joined the DRB last spring, late spring. And we did immediately have like 2 hearings. And so that was a good, I think that was a good way to jump into it. And it strikes me this is one of those things that there's a very interim nature to it. So I think, to the extent we have like systems in place and things written down, that's really helpful to help with that lack of kind of continuity that is the nature of this type of gig, I guess you could say.
Guess that leaves me last. Hi, I'm Philip Matheson. I live on the county road just north of Wheeler Road and Longmeadow Road at the corner of Bliss Pond and County Road. And I've been on the DRB for 2 months.
Philip has yet to have the opportunity to participate in the hearing, but I think Gabrielle's point is really like when it's so intermittent and it's hard, it's not necessarily there's such the formality of the process that I think it's hard to retain without, as Gabrielle says, having it really written down. So, anyway, that's part of what we're going to do. I'm just going to pull my agenda over. Part of what we'll do this evening, but I wanted to give you just a bit of an update regarding the application process. So Jordan did let me know that the select board has a plan. They have received some applications. I know Harris sent his in, and then Paul Oleander, I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name properly. I'm sure some of you know him. Longtime resident, Calais, been on the Conservation Commission and other volunteer is interested. So we have at least two, Paul and Harris, two applications, and the DRB, I think, hopes to make decisions, after town meeting, like I think it's the 28th, somewhere around that date. I don't have the email up in front of me, but I can get it for the minutes or before we end. Why don't I just do it now and find it for folks? No, I closed my email. I'm trying to minimize what I have open. And then Rachel knows this, she's deep into the planning commission work, so the town plan is soon or is now available for public review, and the first hearing is March 20th, I think. Put it in my
20th or
notes.
18th, sometime that week. Yeah.
Some that week. And then the select board has a hearing a month later.
Yep.
So once that is adopted by the select board, then the select board will consider, as I understand, the old new regulations, the regulations. Harris, this may be a little gibberish. So last spring, the town adopted zoning regulations. The town then realized in December that those regulations had been adopted outside the scheme of what the law allowed because the town plan was not current. So I think so we're now, should we end up with any application in the interim, we would go back to the old or then what are really current zoning regulations. But I think the hope is that the select board would be that the town plan and the new regulations would be adopted sort of before building season and when we might be getting some applications to review. So that's just sort of the updates I thought. I don't know, is there anything else within the context of planning and zoning that people think we should be updating folks on? So training, we've been, especially because so many of us are new, been trying to think about training options. So we did have the Vermont League of Cities and Town training last month. And Scott, Phil and I and Gabrielle and Rachel were not able to be there. And unfortunately, we had major Zoom technology meltdown, so it was not recorded. But if anybody wants more detailed notes from that, just email me and I'll share those.
Did you say you weren't, so most of us weren't there?
Toby was there. So Toby,
Okay.
Phil, Scott and I. So there were 4 current members.
Okay.
And then there
Okay.
were 2 or 3, 2 East Montpelier folks in person, and then I think 1 East Montpelier person on Zoom.
Got it.
That's it. The attorney who gave it, his name is Cale Romanoff, and very knowledgeable. He had been actually a zoning administrator in Underhill for a year. So he had some of that practical role experience to draw on. I thought I would just open it up if there was anything that, Scott or Phil wanted to share, or like I have to be honest, I did not sit down and think, oh, what might I bring from that training to the group? But if either Scott or Phil has, I might think of something to highlight.
I mean, I thought it was interesting having it was sort of my first introduction to anything that we're doing. So
Mm.
I highly recommend it for sure.
I really regret not being able to refer back to a recording, but so be it. But as Willa said, if you contact her, there's some good notes available, and we'll probably put the slides, very thorough slides, somewhere on the
Mhm.
DRB page on the website. So those are good to refresh our memories about what went on.
Are we allowed to put their materials on our website? Did they say that was okay?
Good question.
Yeah,
The slides, yes, the slides were fine.
Okay,
We have some additional notes that we probably shouldn't put on there.
and I would say that I mean, I'll speak for myself, but I would bet Phil and Scott would agree that maybe once we have 2 new members, I would be happy to, I mean, I guess we should make it a formal DRB meeting. We could have like a mini, like just sort of like, here's the process. And these are like, we could even go through that PowerPoint and share our joint knowledge, which, you know, Harris and Paul are appointed by the select board. That might be a good grounding. And frankly, I found it because I felt like I learned by swimming in the deep end. And even as somebody having gone through a few hearings now, it was very useful. So,
Good idea.
so we
Good.
can keep that in mind for April or something. The other training topic that our group had discussed earlier was to have a mini training on the Vermont Interactive Map Viewer, which, like Harris, I bet you know how to use. But most of us don't. And Brian Voigt from the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission just emailed me today, and he is available on our March. We have a business meeting scheduled for March, whatever a month is from now.
great.
So he's able and willing to come to the town hall at 6 that evening. So if there's enough of us up for that, then I'll firm that up with him. And it would, my thought was he would just sort of demonstrate. And we could even, like, he said, do you have a particular address in mind? I don't, but we could probably just in the meeting say, let's look up,
We could
Wheeler
use our own
Road.
houses. Yeah,
Yes, and
Yeah.
just sort of like do a little deep dive into it and maybe
Yeah.
go into some part of a historic district or a wetland or.
That'd be great. That seems like a meeting where probably in person would be better if he's like, okay,
So, yeah, I would recommend in person. And I mentioned it to Kathy, my partner, who's on the planning commission. She said, oh, that sounds interesting. So if I was thinking we could open it up to planning commission members.
yeah, I think a bunch
and-
of people
Yeah,
already know how to use it, but those folks who don't would probably really like a little bit of a training.
yeah.
So,
And then my other thought was, we had a few people from East Montpelier, like, I was thinking, why not
Yeah.
invite them? So. Okay. So I will, I'll firm that up with Brian then, and that will be our agenda for the March meeting. And we usually, our business meetings, we've been talking about keeping it to an hour. If you all, the majority of us are comfortable, I was thinking maybe we should plan on an hour and a half for that. I mean, obviously, if people have commitments, they could leave, but okay. I'm seeing some heads nod, so I'll ask Brian for an hour and a half.
Assuming he'll be talking about the new map, the one that the town of Calais bought.
Well, I'll show you, let's see if I can pull it up quickly. Unless Harris, do you probably have it bookmarked, I'm guessing, on your computer?
Well, I do, and I, I might not attend the training, but I think it's important to know that a lot of those boundaries are not necessarily accurate. The
Yeah.
town has
Yeah.
not updated the
Yeah.
tax map that gets sent up to this. And I don't know how long, but I've seen boundaries that are
Okay.
didn't look like that since 2000. So
I
The,
will
I'm
just
looking at,
show this. I don't know how to use this, but like my understanding, you can focus in on an area. So it sounds like there's some caveats to this, but let's say, I think this is the wetland behind us, Harris, eh? No, that's Curtis Pond. So, and then there's all these layers like building points, or you can look at soils. So, as I say, I don't know how to use it, but it looks like an amazing resource. And I bet Brian would would have some caveats as well, when we meet with him. So, yeah,
yeah, and that is the new one on the Calais Maps page. It talks about the Axis GIS Calais web map.
okay,
And
okay.
that's the one the planning commission is using.
oh, okay, so I'm using a different one. So
Are you using
I'll
the
have to look at
parcel
that.
viewer, Harris?
Well, the natural resource atlas.
Oh, yeah, that is a different one.
Yeah, I just assume it's pulling all the same data. Maybe it's not. If Scott is saying that this has updated parcels. I'll look at that.
Like I think what this could be helpful for, from my limited understanding, is like, I can't make it work, but it has contour lines, and so if we get an application, we could go in and look at an address and get a sense of, well, where is there a wetland? People think there's a wetland here, but what's the definition of a wetland? And I know there's, people may argue with what's mapped and not, but anyway, I won't try to belabor the point that I don't know how to use it, but I'm gonna close that, so.
John McCullough and the planning commission made a year-long pitch to the select board to purchase this new version for the town.
Yep.
Rachel, has the planning commission had any sort of training on this map, or just jump in?
Not at meetings I've been able to attend, but I have had some work commitments and illness that have meant that I've missed some planning commission meetings as well. And most of the meetings have really been focused on getting the town plan out the door. So now that we're kind of reaching the end of our part of that, I think that will be high on the agenda.
Yeah.
I do think John, who does most of the mapping for planning commission, is well familiar with how to use it, but the rest of us will have some learning to do.
Yeah.
Vicky probably knows too, because she does mapping in her work.
Right. Yep. Rachel, would it make sense to tell John McCullough that we're having this session, and just to,
I think
F-
what Will has said
FYI
before
to
about
him.
inviting planning commission makes a lot of sense, because
Yeah.
I think other folks will be interested. John may not be one of those people because he
Yeah.
knows how to use it, but other folks I think
Right.
could be there.
Good. Great. Thank you for setting that up, Willa.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just email. So I think the hope in the balance of our time was to look at the rules of procedure and conflict of interest policy that I sent out. This is the document we've looked at, I think, 2 or 3 meetings. So I sent a PDF that's the current version that was adopted in 2021. And then I did not use track changes because we made a number of changes. Some of it was purely like his, her to their and formatting. But the changes that off the top of my head, and Rachel will chime in because she did a lot of the work based on our last meeting, with some updates around the law. So now like interested party persons, it's like 20 versus 10 in the statute. And there's an addition about, where is it? I guess I could show this. I won't, see this document. Maybe what I will do actually is go back to the beginning, highlight what I think is different on this page, and then other people could name, and any questions we could talk about it. So on this first section, and I'm going to minimize this a little bit and hope it's still large enough for people to read. We added in here local law, didn't have that before, so that's the nature of some pretty minor changes.
We also said are adopted to promote consistent and fair treatment. We had a different word in there that was harsher.
It was ensure, I think.
Ensure, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. We added some definitions like board action. And I reordered these to be alphabetical, so they're a little different, Rachel, than what you may have sent. I think business meeting is a new definition. The conflict of interest is the same wording, but we've addressed it a little more, I think, clearly in the document in subsequent sections, although we do. Like there's this, I can't remember how this was named before, but
This
it's
wasn't in there before.
yeah.
We didn't really explain what a perceived conflict of interest was before, so now we have a separate definition of that. And unless something becomes an actual conflict of interest, you're not required to recuse yourself, but you can still choose to recuse yourself based on just a perception of a conflict of interest.
I think all of that addressing conflict of interest is much, much clearer and makes it a lot easier to understand for me anyway.
yeah,
That was the goal. That is one challenge, though, of having them be alphabetical, is that the conflict of interest definition is quite a ways away from the perceived conflict of interest
Yeah.
definition. So
Yeah.
just keep that in mind.
yeah. We could move it, and or we could,
I think it's fine the way that it is, Will. I just wanted to flag that for folks that
right,
3N is
Yeah,
further down. the
or
page.
down.
Yeah.
And I, for me, excuse me. As a new person, I think, and this is something I would say to new members, is it's so easy to think that when you start reading a document that everything you're reading about conflict of interest is here, but it's just the definition. And so it's sort of like read the whole document, put the pieces together. So on this page, I think deliberative session is pretty much the same.
We did
Yeah.
change it a while back to where it used to be that we could have either a public or private deliberative session, and we had a discussion, and so we changed it here that if we were going to have a deliberative session, we wanted it to be a private session, which is what is allowed under the law, and so we were going to have a policy against public deliberation sessions. So
And that's why I highlighted a section later on, because I'm not sure that we captured that. So
Okay.
maybe we can come back to that.
Yeah.
The full board is a new, like we're also trying in this document to be clear about who's a DRB member, what are alternates, what is the sort of, what's a full board? So we have this definition. So there's like business meetings, and then there's hearings, and alternates or full, basically can participate in a business meeting in the same way that any other member, but they're not really a DRB member as part of a hearing unless they're appointed to do that role.
Wait, so is
Yeah.
it, so in the event that an alternate were asked and available to be at, say, the first hearing in a, what do we call them, case?
Hearing or something, yeah,
Yeah,
application.
they could continue with that, but so are you saying it is not a default to turn to an alternate if there is not a quorum of the, non-alternate DRB members?
No, I mean, that would be, and there's more, it's spelled out more down below, but if there's not, if we know in advance that there's not going to be a quorum of regular, I will just call them regular members. I don't know if we describe them that way. Then we ask an alternate to join. And then for the purposes of that hearing, that alternate is a DRB member in the same way as any other, non-alternate DRB member. And the expectation is they will remain involved through that whole application process.
Okay,
And that's
so,
important because we can't make decisions under the statute unless we have a majority vote of the full board, right? So we have to, if we only have 4 people attending a DRB meeting for a proceeding, and one of those is an alternate, we need that alternate to count in order to take action on an application or an appeal.
And then, so this is which I want to talk about quorum, but we'll get to quorum because we're at I. So the interested person's definition is right from statute, and this was a change. This used to be 10. And then there was something else that was new. Oh, this sentence I think is new. Is that right, Rachel?
Yes,
And
that
new-
is new
new
as
in
well.
law.
That got added in the Homes Act a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So, but it's straight from Vermont law, so that's that. So I guess proceeding is the term we could use, Gabrielle. The proceeding is what we're
yeah,
doing. So these, participate in hearing, that's new. And here's the perceived conflict of interest definition. So I think that's really important for people to read and feel agreement with or have agreement with. And later on, we talk about the process. Like, what do you do if you think there's a conflict?
And this is, I drafted this based on kind of our conversation about it. So I'm very open to feedback if this does not capture what folks were thinking about when we last talked about perceived conflict of interest.
so the person who's the subject of the proceeding can say there is a conflict of interest, which after describing it, the DRB then gets to decide whether it is a perceived conflict of interest or an actual conflict of interest. Is that the way to read
Yes.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if it's an
So-
actual conflict of interest, and this is in the procedure stuff below, if it's an actual conflict of interest, we've all agreed we will recuse ourselves if we have an actual conflict of interest. But if it's just a perceived conflict of interest, it's discretionary. If you want to recuse yourself in an abundance of caution, you can, but you don't have to. That's kind of the idea here.
So we probably should come back to this when we get to proceedings, because I think this is important. Public hearing, so quorum, this is something I struggled with in the beginning. So for a business meeting, it's a majority of the full board. And here's where we spell out participation of alternates is welcome, but alternates do not count toward a quorum. But for a proceeding, it's a majority, including any alternate who, then an alternate who's been appointed can be counted towards that quorum. This is what Rachel was speaking about earlier.
And the idea here is to substitute that person in for a missing board member, not to make the number of members of the full board larger. Because then we have the same problem. We still don't have a majority.
So there, I mean, and we don't have to adopt this tonight, but
Yep.
if people have any hesitation, or you feel like if you were totally new and read one of these definitions and it's like, I'm not quite sure, then I think we need to work on the wording. So. Then the section, this is pretty straightforward, you know, the officers. So we're supposed to have a organizational meeting after town meeting, so that's where I, you know, I put in, this is when that meeting would be, where we elect officers. And this is the role, these roles. And then this is sort of new, there's a reference that we might actually have a recording secretary under clerk. And the board, this is an update. So Barbara told me that they're hoping to find somebody who could be a recording secretary for the planning commission, the DRB, and the select board. So all
That would
those
be
three.
awesome. Yeah.
So I think maybe between those three, it might be appealing enough for like a sort of a, you know, more than just any one of those groups. So there's any questions or comments about officers and our duty to review minutes? And here's the section on alternate members. So there's some, you know, cross-referencing and there's the appointment process.
So we did simplify this section a little bit. It used to require that we have a rotating alphabetical list of alternate members. And I think we all agreed that that was an unnecessary burden, and that really any alternate member who volunteered when we needed one, we would take, basically. So it gives the chair a lot more discretion here about adding an alternate when it's needed. And kind of tries to reiterate the quorum piece that we talked about in the definitions.
Any comments about this section? Or do you want a few more minutes to look through it? Gabrielle, I think you're muted if you're, I think you're saying something.
Yeah. So do you need a quorum for a business meeting at all?
You do need a quorum for business meeting under the statute, yeah.
Okay.
So, okay to move on? Just flag if I should slow down. So we're gonna be meeting in the town hall. We now have that reserved for the Wednesday, or third or fourth Wednesday of the month. Although we could go to another place. And then here's the, you know, we're gonna have regular meetings. And for those meetings, agendas have to be posted at least 48 hours. We can do it 24 hours notice. I realized that, well, Barbara got the notice around and Sarah posted on the website the agenda for tonight, but I actually posted it on the Walden Front Porch Forum and not the Calais one.
Whoops.
Hmm.
I got I got a little
Did you get some
grumpy.
feedback?
I did. I got a grumpy email from somebody whom I know from Walden, where I live, when we lived there. Like, it's like I have to breathe a bit before I reply and say, I'm really sorry I made a mistake, but
Yeah.
um there's the quorum. And that, as you know, Scott mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, all meetings will be in person with a virtual option. That's the new part of the new updated open meeting laws, I recall.
Yep.
So we have the option to continue a hearing if the virtual functionality is not working. And, you know, this is all that, of course, our meetings are open to the public unless we have a deliberative session. We could also have an executive session, and there's Vermont law that guides that. We'll have an agenda. And chair rules on all questions of order. And then posting draft minutes, that's by law within 5 minutes. I think
5
it
days.
passed.
5
Sorry,
days. 5 days, not 5 minutes.
5 minutes. That tells you a little bit how I feel pressured about this 5-day thing.
Yeah.
Because, and I find it really ironic. Well, it makes sense. You've got 5 days to do your draft, and then you have 2 weeks after you've approved your minutes. You have 2 weeks before you post those. And next meeting, we will approve minutes, or maybe not. If we're having a training, we might not approve them. So, but we'll get draft ones up. Okay. It was one of my more Freudian misspeaking, I think. All right. Oh, sorry. Any comments, questions about this meeting section? I'm going to scroll down. Okay, so here's, like, this is the, you know, the heavy duty, like, this is our actual proceedings and hearings process. Which, as a new chair, like, I, you know, have my little crib sheet and find this pretty stressful, but this is the process. So Rachel, I should have warned you about my highlighting. I
Yeah.
was uncertain about this piece that I've highlighted in yellow, but I think the A through E is pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
So what I know, this is something I heard Cale say at the training, was he really said his, and not just his, but I think the league's advice around determination of interested persons, don't even go there. Like, as a DRB, just don't try to do it. Let people describe, you know, identify themselves as such, but it's really the environmental board that would make any determination should there be an appeal. So, so then that's why I wasn't sure about this last sentence.
Did I put that in, or was that already there?
I don't remember. It may have already been
I
there.
think it may have already been there.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that is generally my take too, is that we should not try and make interested person determinations, because then it can be its own appeal if we deny someone interested person status, rather than just an appeal of our decision. So it mucks things up, and it's easier to leave it to the e-court. But it's probably worth taking another look at this chapter of Title 24 to
Okay.
see if there was some reason that was in there that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head.
Hmm.
Would
we add something or just try to familiarize ourselves more?
Well, I think if we look at Title 24 and we don't see any obligation to make an interested person determination in appeals of administrator officer decisions,
Yeah,
then we should drop that and just say, like, We're gonna let you tell us if you think you're an interested person, and we're not gonna rule on that matter,
Good.
right?
That
And
would be
leave that to the e-court.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think what we would just say, we would strike, assuming, but we'll
Yep.
verify, we'll strike this. And maybe that would just become any or something. I thought I had track changes on. So maybe what I'll do after is I'll read, be a little test for me. If I can't find anything, if I find something or whatever I think, I'll email Rachel as our resident general counsel.
I'm not your general counsel. I do not give any of you legal advice.
Right. I shouldn't make jokes about that. I will email Rachel, who's more used to reading laws than maybe some of us. And then email everybody. And then when we have a final draft, we can, at a future meeting, vote on that. Okay. So this again is all the procedure that is pretty standard. There may have been some wordsmithing, but nothing significant here.
Yeah, we just tried to make it was very kind of demanding before. And we just tried to make it more of like informational for us of what these steps are, rather than making it sound like somebody would get in trouble if they skipped a step. So,
And my experience is, while it's a formal hearing, but it's also a community meeting. And so like there's this balance between having it too structured and formal and legalistic and having it feel like a proceeding where people are comfortable, understand the law and what their roles are, but feeling comfortable speaking to their application or if they're an interested person. So this to go back to like, that was my recollection the last time we met, that the group really felt that we shouldn't have public deliberations. This doesn't rule out that. It says may decide to conduct public deliberations or vote to enter. I think this would be a
private deliberative.
private.
Yeah.
But so I guess I wanted to ask, like, should we keep it this way or should we make a definitive statement that the Calais DRB will conduct deliberations privately, period? I mean, what are
Yeah.
people's thoughts?
Can I ask a question about that? The if there are private deliberations, it's still a public meeting where people can still attend, they just can't participate. Is that right?
They are actually not allowed to stay for the deliberation when you enter private deliberative session. It's an exception to the public meetings rule, specifically for this quasi judicial function. It's just like you can't, like, yes, a court is open to the public, but the court doesn't get to. That doesn't mean that the public gets to watch the judge deliberate and think through their decision before they write it. Same
Okay.
thing. I would be inclined, given our previous conversation, just to say the board will then vote to enter deliberative session. That would be an okay change to me.
What are other people's thoughts? Yeah, I can,
That's what Rachel just said does sound good to me. Yeah.
it would look like this. The board will vote to enter private deliberative
Yeah.
session.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, are there any scenarios where there would not be a deliberative session? That's hard to
No, I mean, it's
picture.
possible we might adjourn and hold the deliberative session another time, but I don't know how we would make a decision without a deliberative session.
Think my
Yeah,
thinking
I'm fine
is
with that change.
fine with the change.
Yeah, I like that change.
And I guess I do too. I think there could be, and there certainly have been times where it seems really simple, but it's really important to have that conversation to check in, like, is this what we all agree, without
Yeah.
somebody feeling like, I don't want to ask this stupid question, or, you know. Okay, so then, given that we've all agreed here, I'm going to accept this change. And I got, we'll come back to that piece. I'll deal with the yellow later. So next section is site visits. They're open to the public. We don't take testimony. The chair will determine if a site visit is necessary. Ideally, they would be happening right before the public hearing.
And we softened that as well with the when possible.
Right, that's a good, yeah, that's a good catch. Any thoughts about site visits?
We didn't have any site visits, so is this, has this always been there?
This has
Section
always
8?
been there. Yes, this is not a new
Okay.
section. We have not, in the couple that we've had since you've joined, Gabrielle, we have not determined, our chair is not determined, and then we have not determined in the meeting itself that we needed a site visit. But it's always an option.
And I will say, the first few that I participated in, we did have site visits, and I would say, you know, 2 of them, I think it was really helpful, and I think one, I'm not sure we really needed it.
Yeah.
So. And
And I
that's
think
not.
if we have nice complete applications, then it's less likely that it's necessary.
Mhm.
But if
Yeah.
folks are struggling to get us the plans that are required, then it may be more helpful.
Service list, this is existing. I don't think we made any changes here, as I recall.
No, and this is all statutorily required.
That's that. And then here's, so this is important, how we make decisions. So I'm seeing it says may make, so shall we change this will to will?
Yeah.
People feel
Mhm.
comfortable with that? Okay. They're not open to the public and need not be warned. There's a statutory reference. So really, you have to have heard all the testimony and reviewed all the evidence to participate. But that could be done by watching the recording.
Yep.
And looking at written evidence.
Yep.
If, this is, I think, important, that the applicant and all interested, so here's an interesting question. So subject to the written consent of the applicant and all interested persons. So my guess, see what you all think about this, that because we're not determining who actually is an interested person, we would just use the list of anyone who identified themselves as an interested person and get their permission.
So
I
we
think
might want to
this-
say
yeah.
all putative interested persons then,
Okay,
to avoid saying that we've made that determination.
I think it would be pretty rare that this would happen, but it's an option.
I think it happens in other communities more that have like lots of subdivision applications where there's multiple hearings. Somebody might be absent for one hearing, but then they're present for others, and so they can get caught up.
Hmm.
And then just some basics. Motions are made in the affirmative. Chair has the same voting rights. You don't have to have a second. You're expected to vote. And you need a majority of the full board.
Made in the affirmative just means all those in favor? Is that what you mean
Like-
by?
The motion would be,
Motion to grant
grant, yeah,
application rather than motion to deny.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
You want the language of the motion to be clear.
Yeah. And so then you can vote no on the motion to grant. That's how you deny the application.
Do you think, Gabrielle, that should be spelled out more in terms of just clarity for people reading these?
No, I think it's
Okay.
fine.
Okay. Okay,
Pretty much inside baseball rule there.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have to make a decision within 40 days of the final public hearing.
45,
45, what did I say now?
40.
40, I think I'm tired.
Don't shortcut us those 5 days, Willa. We
I
might.
know. 45, I'm gonna give us 5 minutes and 40 days. All right, okay, anything there? Comments, questions, suggestions?
Certainly
Um,
applicants
yeah.
will be interested in this section.
Yeah,
I think having it shortened to the point makes good sense.
yeah, want it to be understandable for people.
Yeah.
So here's the section on conflicts of interest. So this is reorganized in some different wording, so there's first the sort of description of participation, so you won't participate if there's a conflict of interest. And then there's the process around disclosure. So I think people should read this. And then we can talk about it.
I just see a typo and little I that a member to disclose. So that a member disclose, just lose the two, I think.
Mm-hmm. You know, Willa, we use the word perceived conflict
Mm,
in the definitions, and we use the word potential here.
oh,
We
yeah,
might want to say potential or perceived conflict to cover both. And I missed that when I was editing. Sorry.
yeah, that's a good catch.
Although the member does not disclose perceived, is that right? That's,
You
Right.
might,
So
Let's
it would
say-
be somebody else. It would be the applicant or any other person
yeah,
would be identifying
yeah.
a perceived conflict.
When a member discloses a potential conflict or a member of the public discloses a perceived conflict, something like that.
so you think, yeah, that doesn't make sense, does it? A member discloses the potential or is asked about a
So member
potential
is a potential. So maybe I should do another bullet where to do that then, Willa.
Okay.
about potential.
Of,
You
of,
mean,
of perceived, of where perceived conflicts pop up.
okay,
That was really unclear in our former version of
Yeah.
this. So it
Yeah.
would be great to have it cleared up.
Oh, I think I missed something. Rachel, tell me a bit
So
more
I'm
again.
thinking we don't put or perceived in one little I or two little I. But
Okay.
before we create a new three little I and drop the current one down to four and cover and make the new three little I be about perceived conflicts. So an
I like that.
applicant or another participant in a hearing may state on the record their belief of a perceived that there is a perceived conflict of interest. And then we can copy and paste from the definition section, that the board can then discuss that and make a decision as to whether they agree or disagree. And the person is not required to recuse themselves if it's only a perceived and not actual conflict.
That sounds good.
So what I was trying to do here, this is sort of getting into wordsmithing or formatting, but to talk about, what do we call it? Disclosure and then the decision.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, you're right. So
So-
maybe we don't have to do that in three little I because we have decision down below. So do we want the decision to only be about perceived conflicts or also about whether a potential conflict is an actual conflict? If one of us raises something and says, like Gabrielle, that you did recuse yourself from the town's application, you as a potential conflict, right? That
mhm.
do we need to decide that, or does the person get to decide if their potential conflict is an actual conflict?
If a person wants to recuse themselves,
They can, but are there
that's
times where we would
simple.
want to overrule them if they don't want to recuse themselves?
Right.
Can I make a comment, even though I'm not a member yet?
No,
Yeah.
of course, Harris.
Okay. To that point, I think it's, disclosure is really important. And then, if the person says, but I don't think this is a conflict of interest, that's also important to disclose. But if a board member says, well, I'm not comfortable with that, I think it should be up to the board or the
Yeah.
chair or someone that,
Yeah.
this might be a conflict of interest. I think then the person should recuse himself. But the other thing I wanted to say is, I think there should be a distinction between a direct conflict and a potential or perceived. A direct conflict would be, I have a financial interest in this application, or related to the application, or this application is going to block my view, or if it's like a direct conflict of interest, is different than a potential or perceived, which should also be disclosed. I think, my kids go to school with the kids of this applicant. That could be a potential, but I don't think it is.
Yeah,
You know,
that's in the definition. If we go back up to the definitions,
Yeah.
Harris, we break it down as direct
Okay.
or indirect, financial
Okay.
and direct or indirect, personal for real conflicts, actual conflicts. And then now we also have this separate concept of perceived conflict, which is something that somebody feels as a conflict of interest, but isn't any of these things that we've identified in our conflict of interest section. But I agree with that point, that there is a difference between
Yeah.
an actual conflict and a potential or perceived conflict. And that's kind of what we're trying to deal with here. I think the question of, does the board vote on I think we all agree that the board votes on a perceived conflict, right? Something somebody else brings up to us. I think my question is, if somebody brings something up, if one of us brings something up, hey, this might be a conflict of interest. It's a potential conflict of interest. Does that person decide it is a real conflict of interest? Does the chair decide, or do we all decide as a board?
I would say the board.
Okay.
I mean, that's my opinion. What do other people think?
I'm not sure I get the distinction if it's just a matter of who brings it up.
It's a matter of who brings it up, yes. And because if we're bringing it up, we're saying it falls in one of these four categories, right? the only way that something is gonna not fall, the only way that something's gonna be a perceived conflict is if somebody who's not on the board says, hey, I think you, Phil, have a conflict because that's your neighbor 3 houses down. So even though you're not in a butter, land of butter, you're gonna have an interest in this, right? So you didn't bring that up because if you look at your conflict of interest definition, there's no reason to bring that up, right? But
Yeah.
they've brought it up.
What
Yeah.
about the situation where um, a member feels that another member has a conflict and that other member claims that he or she is the one to decide that whether or not he or she has a conflict. I've seen that happen a couple of times in select board meetings, and it's awkward.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I think we would really, like, the important of having these rules. So if somebody says, I think there's a conflict, then the person, the member
A member says, I think there's a conflict here.
conflict, then I think the other member, you think I have a conflict, then I should explain why I don't think there's a conflict. And then the rest of you vote, decide whether I
That
do
would-
or I don't. But like, I want to go back to Phil's point, because I think I'm too, if I'm understanding Phil's point, I'm a little struggling with the distinction between potential and perceived, because like, I guess I'm struggling with, is that a distinction without a difference, potential versus perceived?
So what I would say is when I look at our definition section, we have this definition of what an actual conflict of interest is, right?
Mhm.
So if I'm looking at an application and I see that it is my parents' application, right? I know I have an obligation to say, you know what, Willa, this is my mom and dad's application. I have a conflict of interest. I should recuse myself, right?
Yeah,
But let's say instead I look at an application and I see, oh, it's Scott's application, right? Now we know Scott's going to have recused himself from his own application, but I could see an interested person showing up and saying, hey, you're all conflicted out because you all know Scott because you all sit on the DRB, right? And that to me would not fit any of 1, 2, 3, 4, or in our definition.
yeah.
I'm not related to Scott in any way. I don't have a financial interest in his application. I haven't said anything ahead of time that indicates I'm gonna approve or vote no on his application. And we haven't had any conversations about, right? So
Yeah.
somebody who's not one of us is bringing that up and saying, I think this is a conflict and we should be able to overrule that.
Yeah, yes, I think the chair should just say, that's silly. If we all recused ourselves, there'd be nobody to work on this process. Although actually, didn't we hear somewhere, maybe it was a different set of procedures, that in a case where the whole board is conflicted, the select board can reappoint a temporary board.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Where is that? Is that in statute or is that?
I think there was case law on that
Okay.
at some point. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, maybe I'm getting too into the weeds and I'm conscious of the time and we're sort of going longer, but so let's say I'm trying to look. So if there's a perceived conflict, we as a board, well, let's just take, like, I haven't read this recently, but like the neighbor, like you're a neighbor. Let's say Harris submits an application.
Okay.
I'm a neighbor. I walk his dog, we walk together and snowshoe together sometimes, like, we're friendly.
Mhm.
somebody may say, well, even though, this is one of the questions the select board asked me, can you do this? Can you be objective? And I may say, well, I can be objective on Harris's application for these reasons. To me, people may still perceive that I can't do that.
Right.
And it may not meet the strict definition here, but the board may feel that the perception is strong enough. Like, I mean, this is sort of my feeling, that the board may feel the perception is strong enough that for the proceedings to be considered fair and like the outcome to be as just as possible, that I should recuse myself. And I may, then you should all vote and say, Willa, you should recuse yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Or
so
not.
how
not.
is that perception different than the potential that I might have a conflict?
So the difference is you and Harris are not related. And so
Right.
there's not a direct or indirect personal interest, right?
Mhm.
You don't have a financial interest in his application.
Yeah.
This is not a situation where you've publicly displayed a prejudgment about his application. And it's
Mhm.
not a situation where you and Harris have had an ex parte communication about the application. So there's nothing in our conflict of interest definition that would require you to recuse yourself, right? So that's why
Right.
it's not potentially one of these four things. It's a different thing. People are perceiving it as being like one of these four things.
Mhm.
And so we have the discretion with something that is perceived as being like one of these four things to say, you know what, Willa, we agree it's not an actual conflict of interest, but you're gonna choose on your own to recuse yourself anyway, or if you don't, we're gonna go ahead and vote and require you to recuse yourself, right?
And
Or
by
where-
that vote, you're sort of determining it is an actual conflict.
Yeah.
So, and is the idea to add to what is an actual, to include in the definition of actual, potential, and perceived? Is that the point? I'm
So I
sorry.
think we're
Maybe I
still
should
trying
take
to
this offline.
keep separate things that are actually conflicts and things that are only perceived as conflicts, but to acknowledge that we live in a small community. And so things can be perceived as being just as serious as one of these four things. And
Yeah.
so there will be times where we're going to say, you know what, it's not an actual conflict, but you should have to recuse yourself just based on the perception of a conflict, because
Yeah.
perception can be just as serious as the real thing,
Yeah.
right?
And that's what this paragraph is, this sentence.
Yeah.
I think,
So,
in a case like that, I think it would be really helpful for the board to vote in one way or another, to have it on the record.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah, I
accept.
feel like we should be erring on the side of really considering both conflicts, whether they're potentially one of these four or they're perceived conflicts, they're not one of these four, there's something else.
Yeah.
And documenting that we've considered it, we've deliberated on it, and we've made a decision on it. I think that puts us in good stead.
I think I
so.
got it. So potentially potentially 1 through 4
Yep.
is different than 5.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry to be slow on this point. Let me go
No,
back
I
down
think it's
here.
really well worth us hashing it out, because I feel like this was one of the places where we all were getting kind of stuck
Yeah,
in terms of our conflict of interest policy.
so I'm just gonna write in here. So the point, oh, I hate when I have track changes on like that.
Me too.
Just take it off for now and then, So, I thought I turned it off. I'm sorry, I'm gonna make you all nauseous with this. Track changes is off. Right, yeah, okay, so, potentially a conflict as defined, I don't know, it's numbers 1 through 4. versus the board deciding a perceived conflict is an actual conflict. Which is.
We're
so
not
the-
deciding it's an actual conflict. We're deciding it's serious enough the person should recuse themselves anyway.
But we sort of name it that up
It still
top.
doesn't fit the definition. What's that?
So in the definition section, where is it? We say a conflict does not include unless such perceived conflict has determined by the board to be
Oh,
an
you're right.
actual.
Yep, okay.
So, so maybe it's,
Maybe we change this, maybe we leave this, leave it as is not a conflict, but then in the definition below of perceived conflict, we say something about how a person can be required to recuse even based on a perceived conflict.
so maybe delete that. And then add here. The board, it might be in here already, but just for my
Yeah.
notes, board votes whether,
I think it's right here. I think where it says is an actual conflict of interest on the second to last line, Willa, we change that to say merits requiring recusal, nevertheless merits requiring recusal.
merits requiring recusal. And do we add any, so I'm back to the belaboring the potential point, the potential conflict. Do we add a definition of a potential conflict with this sort of repeat the perceived, or is that not necessary?
We could say a potential conflict of interest is a conflict which may fall within one of the fall within the definition of conflict of interest. And therefore must be discussed and decided by the board. And if you want me to wordplay with that a little bit later, Willa, I'm happy
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah.
So do people like, does that make sense? Is that a little clear? I mean, it's clear for me. I don't hope I didn't, maybe it was all clear to everybody before, but.
I would be very comfortable having Willa and Rachel hash this out a little bit more. I'm not prepared to vote on this tonight.
No.
That's
agree.
totally fair. Yeah.
It's 1:15. Is everybody okay if we do 5 more minutes? Because I think we're very near the end
Yeah.
of this. Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good. All right, so here we are. So we're gonna work on this section. I'll just like make sure it works for people. So then that's my mouse. So we may need to, we'll look at this too and make sure it all aligns with what we've discussed. So then there's the ex parte communication is prohibited. I don't think we changed anything here. May have been
We
reordered
did.
a
That
bit.
second paragraph,
Yes.
we added that it's not an ex parte communication for the chair to notify the applicant or appellant of the criteria we think is likely to be applied in reviewing their decision or asking them to provide additional information. That's new.
I think that's important for people to agree with. We did talk
Yeah.
about that, but.
Yeah.
And that was part of our discussion about making sure people come to the hearings prepared and feeling, like informed.
We don't want to force folks to have their hearings continued over and over again because they don't know what they don't know.
So then just for board members, if you think here's a section, if you think you've received or participated, then that has to be documented. This is the remote removal section, the select board, the board can request that the select board remove a member. And then here are the amendments. So this is like we have to give at least 24 hours before the meeting at which the vote is taken. So my suggestion is Rachel and I will polish. There's someone in my office who used to talk about buffing and polishing a document. We're going to do a little editing first, then buff and polish. Do you remember Mary Kay, Gabrielle? That was her expression.
Mary Kay Swanson.
Yes, yeah.
Mhm.
Then we'll send it out and I think when I send it out, I'll say, please read the conflict of interest sections extra carefully, because that's what really will be different from what you've all seen. And then my suggestion is at our March meeting, which is a training, we have on the agenda a vote. But if there's any discussion, we'll table the vote. But if if people have read it and feel comfortable, then we could vote. Does that feel acceptable to people, or yeah?
That sounds good.
Okay.
Works for me.
Yeah. Thanks, Phil. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you I know we went a little long, but it would be good to get this finished, I think.
Mhm.
I feel like we've made it better.
I do too. Yeah. And, for me, frankly, just spending time with the document is good to help me digest and understand it. So if we have our training meeting, if our March meeting is basically a training, then maybe at our April business meeting, assuming we don't have any applications, my thought is we would go back to the discussion that we had a number of months ago about meeting with the planning commission and talking about the application and that whole sort of process and procedure and documents.
Yeah.
Which would be a significant chunk of work, but I think we could at least start talking about how to tackle that.
Certainly needed, very much needed.
Yeah. Any other
What's
business?
the date of the March meeting?
Let me see.
Third Wednesday.
Third Wednesday. Yeah. Okay.
I think it might be the 20th.
All right. Thanks.
Um,
I think it'll be the 19th again, because February is a
19th.
28-day month.
19th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
19th.
it'll match.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, I think we're all finished. No other business to bring to the group. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for persisting with that. And thanks to Rachel for a lot of really helpful work on this
Very good.
document. So,
Yep.
None of which was
Thank
legal
you.
advice.
Okay.
All right.
have a good rest of the evening, everybody.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Night,
You
everybody.
too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Night.
Scott.